Welcome to the ESI Africa studio, broadcasting from NNet Africa. Today I am speaking with Grace Perkins, who is the Operations Director at AMDA. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you for having me.
So, Grace, there's been a lot of research that AMDA has undertaken, and specifically looking at small-scale renewable energy. So let's talk a little bit about the role of mini-grids in Africa.
Sure. Thanks. Well, mini-grids are such an important part of the energy transition in Africa. They really are infrastructure, and they're a solution for providing clean, affordable, and reliable energy to millions of people across Africa who currently live without energy access. I think the important thing to realize about mini-grids is that they are often sources of clean energy. And I think when we think about global trends in the energy sector around the world, we're moving towards decentralization. So Africa has an opportunity to leapfrog ahead to where Europe and America are going back to, which is decentralized units of power.
Okay. Let's just unpack a little bit. What does a mini-grid look like? It's either grid connected, it can be off-grid, it can be any size. So in your view, as AMDA, what is that, or how could you define a mini-grid?
Sure. So AMDA is the Africa Minigrid Developers Association. So we are an industry association of private companies who own and operate mini-grids. And for the most part, our members are focused on bringing electricity access to people who don't currently have a grid connection. So in some cases, mostly around the continent, this is people who live far away from where the grid currently reaches or ever reach in a reasonable amount of time. Other members can power whole cities, perhaps in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there is no other grid infrastructure. So we don't have a specific definition. I think that the World Bank recently put out a handbook on mini-grids for 500 million people, and they have specific sizes. Usually they're around 100 to 200 kilowatts. Our members mostly focus on hydro-powered or solar-powered mini-grids. But yeah, and what our members really focus on is bringing that electricity access to places where it doesn't currently exist.
So let's also look at the policy behind mini-grids, and what is it that governments can do to help promote or support the development of these infrastructures?
Sure. Governments have really important decisions to make when it comes to setting their mini-grid policies. So they have to think about what kind of tariffs do they want people living in remote areas to pay. Should they be the same as what we pay in the cities? Should they be less? Should they be higher? Governments also have an important decision when it comes to whether mini-grid development should be led by private companies or whether it should be tendered out. But I think for private companies on the private sector side, the most important thing is to once a government makes a decision, to really have a steady, stable state for the private sector to come in. That's what's really important. Is if the regulations and what's actually happening in the business environment are different, that makes it hard for private sector investment. Or if we make a set of rules and regulations and frameworks, but then the actual implementation is different, that also makes it really difficult for private sector companies to come in.
Right. So you've talked about investment into mini-grids. So let's explore the financing behind it and what needs to happen in order to facilitate the financing in a really progressive way.
Sure. So in general, mini-grids need a mix of equity, debt, if it's available. It hasn't been available traditionally in the mini-grid sector, and then some level of concessional financing, especially if a government decides that it wants to have a lower level of tariff than a lower level of tariff than maybe a cost-reflective tariff. What we're seeing now in the mini-grid sector, we're calling it, it's a bit dramatic, but it's the valley of death. So we're seeing that there's enough financing available if you're wanting to do one or two mini-grids as a proof of concept. There's a little more investment available when you're doing pilot stage, so maybe 5 mini-grids at a time. But if you want to reach scale, and scale is important in the mini-grid sector because it leads to profitability. We found that you need 40 to 60 mini-grids in a market, or about 10,000 to 15,000 connections for those individual, for the profits of the individual microgrids to reach a corporate level of profitability. So in that sort of valley, the missing middle of investors, there are few investors that are going to help us get to 10s, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 mini-grids at a time. And that's where we're also seeing a need for corporate equity investors to come in so that mini-grid companies can build the teams that they need to then expand and operate more mini-grids at scale.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Grace, because we've definitely seen growth of mini-grids in Africa. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.